Hello, everyone. My name is Maria, and I'm a CSPC Program Committee volunteer. We're about to start the panel entitled Community Science and Plastic Pollution, organized by Environment and Climate Change Canada. This year, CSPC provides simultaneous translation and closed captions for all panels, both in French and English. So if you look at the back of the room, you have the QR code for the application that you need to download to get access to subtitles in your preferred language. Please use your own device and headphones. And this year we have a conference mobile app. So feel free to download it. It's called CSPC 2024. You get it from the App Store or Google Play. And this is a panel with polls. So you would need to download the application, go to the panel number, which is 249, and then click on polls. And whenever your moderator says that it's time to do the polls, go ahead. And please remember that we want to see lots of tweets and posts about your favorite events and moments of the conference. So don't forget to do that, and maybe add an @science policy or hashtag CSPC 2024. And at the end of the session, I'll also remind you of that, but we want your opinion. So please scan the QR code that you see on the screen and fill the survey regarding this panel, and you'll need to put the panel number. So that's it for me. Enjoy the panel, and thank you for being here. And I'll hand it now to your moderator.
Can you hear me? Nope. Okay, maybe I'll if you try. Does yours work? Hello? Is that Sylvie? Sorry, we should have tried this before. There we go. Okay, no, thanks everyone. I think this one's working now. Okay, there we go. So welcome everyone, and welcome to our session on community science and plastic pollution. So as you may have guessed from the pictures, I am not Dr. Mark Diorio, nor do I try to play him on TV. I do work with Mark. I'm with the Science and Technology branch at Environment and Climate Change Canada, and me and my team, we work on science policy, including plastic science. So it's something that is near and dear to us. Before we start, I do want to thank Nancy Lee, who I think is here, who's done a lot of the legwork in putting this on, along with the logistics people. And anyway, so I should have saved that one maybe for the end, but this is I'm really happy and really proud of this today's discussion. What we're going to do. So I'll just make some quick opening remarks, and I think we'll go through a poll. So merci de participer à la présente discussion pendant laquelle nous penchons sur la question de la pollution par le plastique, l'un des enjeux environnementaux les plus importants de notre époque. Ensemble, nous examinerons la façon dont le pouvoir de la science communautaire peut aider à faire progresser la science des plastiques, à améliorer notre compréhension du problème que représente la pollution par le plastique et à favoriser des solutions durables. So something that terrifies me with technology, we're going to try with these polls, which I'm told will work with the app. So before we begin, let's try. So to the degree, are people familiar with community science is the first question. So I'm not sure how one does the poll, but I'm told. Okay. Okay. And then the second question, I think we do them both at the same time. Do people know where to find or how to access data from community science initiatives? Do you see results? Submitted.
Oh, it's not working. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
So they're supposed to be up.
They're supposed to be. Okay. So I'll add a little bit. So we know just from dealing with people internally who do public opinion research that people place a lot of faith or have a lot of confidence and are mobilized better by community science sometimes than by government science. So we see a lot of interesting research on how people perceive things. So we know that there's an inherent trust that comes from community science. And we are trying as an organization, as a government, to incorporate more community science in what we do. So we know it's important. So today, I think one of the things I highlight is some of the work that some of the organizations that Charlie and Anne-Marie are involved with, and try to drive some discussion on where more we can incorporate community science using plastics as a way. So community science is driven and controlled by local communities. The science approach leverages the collective intelligence and enthusiasm of diverse communities to address complex challenges and inform evidence-based policymaking. So one example is OceanWise's Shoreline Cleanup Initiative, which has helped inform the development of single-use plastics regulations in Canada. Under this initiative, volunteers gather data on quantity, weight, and types of plastic pollution they find, which will later input into a publicly accessible database. This database provides valuable, localized insights that have informed both scientific research and government policies, ensuring that regulations are grounded in real-world data. Un autre exemple concernant l'Organisation Bleue, qui a élaboré une norme pour la collecte et l'analyse des données sur les déchets. Ces normes sont nécessaires pour assurer l'uniformité, la validité et l'applicabilité des données pouvant servir d'éléments fondamentaux du processus scientifique et de preuve pour la prise de mesures à l'avenir. So, taking a step back, in Canada, we are applying the science that we get to take action through the Canada-wide strategy and action plan on zero plastic waste, which includes a specific focus on effective research and monitoring, including community science. This initiative is supporting creating a federal plastic registry to gather data on plastics and funding opportunities such as the Canadian Plastics Innovation Challenges. Le plan exhaustif du Canada pour réduire la pollution par le plastique et passer à une économie circulaire des plastiques est également renforcé par le programme scientifique canadien sur les plastiques qui jette les bases nécessaires à la prise de décision éclairées par les données scientifiques probantes et à la mesure des progrès qui seront réalisés à l'avenir. So I think with that, I will maybe start turning it over to the panelists. I do like the cross-section of panelists we have, from Dr. Provencher, who's a federal government scientist, to Charlotte, who's with a municipal government, so very tied into citizens, and then two esteemed participants from NGOs or citizen science type organizations. So I don't know if we drew a coin of who's going to go first. We'll try to do little short presentations. I have 4 questions here, but we'll throw a bit of a curveball. If the audience has questions, please feel free to make known. And we've agreed that we're happy to take more questions from the audience if they come up. So please feel free after the presentations to stand at the microphone, and we'll call on you if you have any specific questions. So if we're going alphabetically, je pense que c'est Anne-Marie qui va aller première. Alors, je peux vous passer la parole. Je crois qu'on va avoir tes diapos sur l'écran. Oui. Oh, OK. Merci. Anne-Marie, la cofondatrice et directrice exécutive de l'Organisation Bleue. Alors, je vous passe la parole.
Merci. Je vais présenter en français et ensuite, je vais enchaîner en anglais pour les questions. Donc, comme ça, tout le monde pourra discuter dans la même langue. Bonjour et merci de l'invitation d'être sur ce panel. C'est vraiment un plaisir de pouvoir partager le fruit de ce travail, près d'une décennie, en fait, de travail et de mobilisation sur le littoral du Canada. Donc, ce littoral, en fait, est assez vaste puisque la zone d'étude s'étend dans tout l'est du Canada, en fait, donc des Grands Lacs jusqu'à l'Atlantique. C'est une zone d'intervention qui est vaste et donc très ambitieuse, mais au bout de 5 ans, en fait, on a réussi à recenser exhaustivement 150 berges de toute cette superficie-là, ce qui nous permet aujourd'hui de dresser le premier portrait de la pollution plastique sur les zones côtières de l'Est du Canada. Donc, un travail de force, je pourrais dire. Je présente un peu notre organisation. Donc, l'Organisation Bleue est née en 2018. Ses principales missions, la conservation du milieu marin et aquatique du Québec. Et on a finalement étendu dans tout l'est du pays. Donc, on couvre autant des milieux aquatiques en eau douce que les milieux marins en milieu océanographique. On a une approche qui est circulaire et interdisciplinaire, ce qui veut dire que nos projets de recherche fondamentaux sont basés sur la science, mais on a des chercheurs de toutes sortes d'horizons, en fait, qui gravitent autour de nous dans des domaines aussi éclectiques que la création littéraire, les sciences humaines en communication numérique. On a beaucoup de productions vidéo aussi à la hauteur de grandes productions comme National Geographic ou la BBC. Et tous ces outils-là, tous ces chercheurs-là et tous ces axes-là d'approche à la problématique nous permettent d'aborder, la problématique de façon complètement déconstruite et différente, mais ça nous permet surtout de rejoindre le public. De façon assez colossale. On a des retombées, notamment à travers nos expéditions qui nous permettent de rejoindre des dizaines de millions de personnes à travers les médias traditionnels, mais également les médias numériques. Donc, on a une agilité qui est remarquable, en fait, dans la scène environnementale de l'Est du pays. Et donc, depuis 5 ans, on mobilise les communautés de façon participative à se mobiliser et venir nettoyer les berges du terrain d'études avec nous. Et ça nous permet également de sensibiliser au plus grand nombre, évidemment, face à la pollution plastique. Le travail a commencé en 2018, justement. C'est une vidéo, là, ça. Peut-être que ça ne fonctionnera pas. Ça fonctionne pas, mais c'est pas grave. C'est des images de déchets canadiens, en fait. Donc, c'est une alternance de sacs de plastique, de briquets, de mégots de cigarettes. On voit des gens se mobiliser aussi autour de la problématique. Et donc, le projet est né en 2018 après une première enveloppe de financement qui nous est littéralement tombée sur la tête, où on s'est fait demander de se mobiliser de Terre-Neuve jusqu'au Grand Lac pour réaliser une série de nettoyages de berges pour essayer de rallier un peu les provinces ensemble dans cet enjeu-là. Et quand on m'a dit « tu pars à Terre-Neuve en VR, en véhicule motorisé, pour recenser des berges pendant 3 mois et demi », je me disais « j'arrivais de l'Amérique latine, j'avais voyagé beaucoup dans le continent de plastique atlantique, dans le coin des Bermudes, et je me disais, je ne sais pas si je vais trouver autant de déchets que je pense dans mon propre pays. » Eh bien, c'est sans surprise que dès Terre-Neuve, dès le premier nettoyage, en fait, on a cumulé près d'1 tonne de matière en moins de 3 heures à 15 personnes. Et c'est là où j'ai été frappée, en fait, par la réalité du territoire canadien. Notre territoire est, d'une part, magnifique, immense, mais évidemment n'est pas épargné de la pollution plastique. Ce qui m'intriguait aussi avec mon retour vers les Grands Lacs, donc on a descendu le courant, c'était de me pencher sur le Québec et l'Ontario à me dire, est-ce que je vais retrouver les mêmes genres de morceaux de plastique, les mêmes déchets dans ce continuum-là? Et évidemment, sans surprise, il y a beaucoup de variabilité selon les secteurs économiques, selon les mœurs des populations locales également, mais aussi dans ce continuum où les déchets sont transportés des Grands Lacs jusqu'à l'Atlantique, on voit aussi une dégradation du plastique en cours de route. Donc, la lecture devient de plus en plus précise, exhaustive, complexe, et là, on commence à travailler sur des solutions. Et cette solution-là commence par l'amélioration des données publiques concernant la prévalence des produits plastiques dans l'environnement. Ce que ça veut dire, c'est qu'on est en train de monter une base de données exhaustive qui comprend 156 sous-catégories d'items plastiques qu'on retrouve sur les littoraux. Donc, c'est un travail très pointilleux où on va venir caractériser tout ce qu'on retrouve dans différents secteurs, différentes matières plastiques, différents mœurs de la population à consommer des trucs, notamment les produits du fumeur. On voit des catégories émerger, comme avec la légalisation du cannabis. Ce qu'on ne retrouvait pas avant, là, on retrouve des pots, des tubes, des sachets. La pandémie a amené son lot de masques, de gants, de produits d'hygiène personnelle sur les littoraux, ce qu'on voit beaucoup moins maintenant. Et on commence à voir aussi émerger des municipalités qui vont bannir le plastique, comme à Montréal avec la restauration rapide. Et on voit de moins en moins de paille en plastique, mais on voit tout autant de paille en carton, d'ustensiles en bois. Donc, on voit que les comportements des usagers ne changent pas, mais que l'impact environnemental pourrait avoir un impact profond, en fait, sur la santé écosystémique. Et donc, dans cette optique, on travaille tout le monde ensemble à essayer d'harmoniser ces bases de données-là, de les partager publiquement pour avancer collectivement dans l'Est du pays vers une démarche, une méthodologie et une vision qui est unifiée pour que les données servent et se parlent entre elles. Donc, on se dit, science citoyenne, en fait, c'est community-driven, but science-fueled. Ce que ça veut dire, c'est que la communauté est invitée à se mobiliser sur le terrain avec nous, à ramasser les déchets, mais c'est les professionnels qui ensuite, les biologistes, les géographes, les techniciens terrain, qui vont, eux, prendre la prise de données. Et c'est ce qui fait de nos données des données rigoureuses et très robustes face aux enjeux climatiques. Les recensements de macroplastiques, vous avez un bon exemple ici. Donc, on va centraliser tous les déchets sur une bâche où on va venir caractériser, trier et élaborer finalement ces 156 catégories au fil d'un recensement. Ces recensements-là peuvent impliquer la communauté, mais peuvent aussi mobiliser des petites équipes terrain. On pense à des aires marines protégées, des petites îles très éloignées dans le fond du golfe du Saint-Laurent, par exemple, où uniquement des techniciens de Pêche et Océan Canada ou Parc Canada pourraient avoir accès. Eh bien, ces recensements-là peuvent aussi se faire en petite équipe de professionnels, ce qui nous démarque aussi un petit peu de ces initiatives qui existent et prolifèrent, en fait. Et là, les vidéos ne fonctionnent pas, donc je ne pourrais pas vous montrer. C'est l'accéléré de notre protocole et du tri des catégories. Et bien évidemment, les données, une fois qu'elles sont collectées, c'est important de les pérenniser. Donc, ce qui vient ensuite, c'est le partage de ces données-là. Donc, on travaille avec le Système intégré d'observation des océans du Canada, le CIOC, et l'Observatoire global du Saint-Laurent. On travaille cette année en phase 2 à amener nos données dans des bases de données internationales via les programmes environnementaux de l'ONU. Et c'est une façon pour nous de rendre accessible cette donnée-là, une donnée qui est rare, qui est nichée et qui pourrait servir à des universitaires, des compagnies, le gouvernement, pour utiliser ce savoir-là acquis et l'utiliser pour améliorer l'environnement canadien. Et les résultats qu'on voit se dessiner au bout de 5 ans d'analyse, eh bien, c'est que la pollution, elle est omniprésente sur le littoral de l'Est du Canada. La particularité du territoire, c'est que c'est une pollution qui est endémique, sauf sur la côte atlantique. La densité des déchets plastiques augmente de manière significative en direction du Golfe et de l'Atlantique, ce qui laisse croire à l'occurrence de courants marins et un potentiel gire, même dans le Golfe du Saint-Laurent. Et l'autre constat qu'on voit se dessiner, c'est la quantité de morceaux de plastique qui augmente vers le Golfe et l'Atlantique, ce qui suggère une dégradation continue des plastiques lorsqu'ils sont transportés par les courants. Je vais sauter quelques slides là, pour rentrer dans un 5 minutes crunch. Et on va plus loin. Donc, on comptabilise aussi la responsabilité élargie des producteurs qui nous permet de traquer, en bon anglicisme, les compagnies qui sont responsables. On peut aussi traquer les langues des étiquettes qui sont utilisées. Ça nous permet de géolocaliser un peu la provenance de ces déchets-là. Et ça nous permet de dresser finalement une responsabilité élargie pour amener une discussion qui est peut-être moins directionnelle vers les usagers, mais qui inclut les producteurs également et qui permet d'ouvrir de façon intégrée cette réflexion-là sur la pollution plastique. Et donc, là aussi, je vais passer vite, mais vous voyez qu'on reconnaît quand même les marques canadiennes comme Naya, Nestlé, Tim Hortons, sans surprise. On voit Nature Valley. Pour le Québec, le Saint-Hubert, le restaurant le plus apprécié des Québécois. Et on a, fait anecdotique, mais on a une collaboratrice à Sable Island qui est située à l'embouchure du golfe du Saint-Laurent dans l'Atlantique. Et cette chercheuse prend des données pour nous et elle remarque énormément d'emballage, d'étiquetage en français en provenance du Québec, ce qui laisse soupçonner une grande empreinte finalement de l'Est du Canada vers le continent de plastique atlantique. Et donc, à la fin de l'année 2024, on a, en fait, au printemps 2024, on a diffusé toute cette information-là sur le premier portail de la pollution plastique au Canada qui s'appelle pollutionplastique.ca, plasticpollution.ca. On a un petit souci avec la carte interactive, mais normalement, ça devrait être rectifié dans quelques jours. Et donc, sur ce portail-là, qui est en version bêta, en fait, on est en train de développer un espèce de résumé des données qu'on a collectées pour que ça soit disponible au public. Et on crée des portes d'entrée également sur le portail vers nos bases de données archivées sur l'OGSL et le CIOC, ce qui nous permet vraiment de pérenniser, d'ouvrir la science et les connaissances sur un ensemble d'intervenants sur le terrain. Et on a entamé la phase 2 en septembre dernier, qui nous amènera jusqu'au printemps 2025, où là, on automatise le protocole afin d'avoir accès à la donnée le plus directement possible. Et on est en train d'entraîner un bébé d'intelligence artificielle dans le but de justement trier, classer, sortir des statistiques et des tendances à travers les données qu'on collecte directement sur le terrain. Donc, ensuite, c'est aussi de former des équipes, donc augmenter notre force de tir en amenant des gardes fauniques, des techniciens, des biologistes, des géographes et même des archéologues à travailler sur nos inventaires des matières plastiques sur les littoraux et que chaque intervenant territorial puisse s'approprier son petit bout de terrain pour mieux comprendre l'incidence de la pollution plastique et amener ses propres recommandations. Et donc, de cette façon-là, on veille vraiment à grandir ensemble vers un collectif, une collectivité, une compréhension plus globale et une force de tir qui va être franchement plus efficace détenus par un seul petit groupe d'individus. Donc voilà, je vous remercie beaucoup et je passe la parole à d'autres.
Merci, Anna. Okay, thank you. Next, alphabetically, but not in importance or interest, is Charlie Cox. Charlie is the Director of Ocean Pollution and Plastics at Oceanwise. So over to you, Charlie. Okay, we'll do them after this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great. Am I speaking into the microphone properly? I think so. Well, firstly, thanks so much to ECCC for inviting us here. Very happy to be here on behalf of Oceanwise and speaking a little bit about our community science program and really also to be able to connect with other experts in the field and collaborators and had so many good connections already. So yeah, really excited about all of that. I realize now standing here that I have shared a abbreviated presentation with you. So that means that I will definitely come under the time limit, but also that I'll just start by introducing Oceanwise and my role, and then we'll move on to, this is the meat of the work. But Oceanwise, for those of you who are not familiar, we're based in Vancouver, but with people across Canada and work across Canada and a little bit internationally as well. We are working on 3 primary ocean conservation challenges: overfishing, climate change, and pollution. And obviously today we're here talking mainly about pollution, and that's my brief. That's the part that I work on. Speaking of community action and citizen science, the Oceanwise Shoreline Cleanup Program has been running now since 1994. We've had over 1 million volunteers in that time who have come out with us to clean shorelines across Canada, to collect trash, and to be inspired and empowered to take direct action on this enormous and sometimes seemingly kind of overwhelming challenge. But we bring people out onto the shoreline, we engage them in this issue, and we hopefully help them take home and take to work some practical steps and advice that they can implement in their daily life. That's one portion of it, that kind of engagement side. And the other side of it, obviously, is about data collection. So all the time during the event, volunteers and participants are recording the data as they go and then submitting it at the end. So we have a record of everything that we find. And I think at this point, I will move to my next page. So what do we do with the data? And this is really where, alongside that engagement piece, this is really where the value is. And when people come out on the shoreline, this is the piece that we're always trying to reiterate and to emphasize, is that only with the data can we go and inform change upstream, because all of us know here, hopefully appreciate the value of direct action outside and on the shoreline, but we also know that really that's not how we're going to address plastic pollution in a meaningful, transformative way. So we take the data that we gather each year and we generate a report on the items that we find most commonly. We call it the dirty dozen. It's down there in the bottom right. And that's the 12 items that show up most often on shorelines at our cleanups. And it's through that list that we're able to inform those policy decisions. The best example is the single-use plastics ban. That's kind of momentous policy action that we're still actually we're working on the implementation at kind of devolved levels, but really has driven a kind of momentum for the plastics issue and for work on plastics in various different ways that hopefully we'll come on to. that's the policy side. This data also allows us to direct our energies upstream in different ways. So we have a plastic reduction program. I think the name could be a little more subtle and interesting perhaps, but through that program, we're working with the industries that are generating a lot of this trash that we see. So we're working a lot with hospitality, food and beverage sectors, because we keep seeing those type of single-use items, bottle caps, coffee cups. I mean, we're all familiar with this kind of category of trash. To identify alternatives, how can we reduce or remove single-use items out of your business operations with better alternatives? And we've got some great examples where that's happened. So that's another kind of upstream practical piece of work that we're able to do when we transform our data. And then just finally, this is my last slide, and then I'll hand over to the next speaker. But we're targeting three particular municipalities to kind of implement the results from our data. So Vancouver, Nanaimo over on Vancouver Island on the west coast, and Halifax on the east coast. And we are working with those municipalities to understand trends in the litter data, understand how they are potentially influenced by seasonality, events, and also policies and practices happening in those particular places. And so we're able to adapt insights and recommendations for those municipalities based on what we find, and also based on their priorities as well. I heard someone in an earlier session kind of cringing at the term meeting people where they are. I hear that as an environmentalist. I think we all kind of want everyone to do more, but also we recognize that we need to be practical and pragmatic and just move things along with where we're at right now. And that's where this kind of adaptation to local priorities and local priorities, that's where that comes in. So with that, I will leave it there and hand over, and then look forward to questions or discussion whenever is the right time for that. I'll leave that to you. But thanks very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlie. Okay, so up next is Charlotte Oeta, Director of Policy, Planning and Outreach for Solid Waste Management Services at the City of Toronto. Okay, we also have poll results. Can I let you do the honor, Nancy?
So hopefully everyone had a chance to look at the poll.
Ooh.
Okay, so this is our second question. Do you know where to find or how to access data from community science? Oh, okay. Sorry, I'll just go. Actually, give him a minute to.
There we go.
Okay,
Okay, that's more encouraging.
Oh yeah, that is great.
Where yes, where no. So, okay.
Perfect. So
Interesting.
it sounds like most of us have an idea of what community science is, so that's great. I think it will lead to a really good discussion. And the second question is, do people know where to find or how to access data from community science initiatives? And I think this is even more telling, I guess, because all of the work that our esteemed panelists are doing, it's good to know that maybe we need to continue to do a little bit more work on getting that data out there and communicating how to access it, where to find it, things like that. So thank you very much for taking that poll.
Thanks, Nancy. Okay.
Okay. It's not.
Bear with us here.
Oh, there we go. No, I can't remember how.
Wait, there you go.
Okay.
They're all in different places. I think Jennifer's going to talk about this.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.
So I'm speaking here on behalf of, I guess, City of Toronto. So sort of the municipal perspective, what we do here at the city in terms of developing policies and bylaws through public consultation. That's one aspect of community science, I believe, in terms of actually getting feedback from the individuals that are required to make some sort of behavioral change in their day-to-day activities. So I just want to speak about sort of how we did that engagement since 2018. So unlike, many places across the world governments, climate change is definitely a big crisis and something that we're all working towards bettering the environment that we leave behind. So that is definitely one of our Toronto City Council's priorities, where we've declared a climate emergency. And the work that we do in my division, so solid waste management services, where we manage about 900,000 tons of waste annually, provide services to over 1 million customers. We make sure that we plan all our policies and all our programs to have this in mind, the goal of reducing emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, but also balancing that with, of course, being a municipality. We are, solid waste is fortunately, we are rate-based, but, property taxpayers, and making sure that we are balancing the financial interest as well as the environmental interest that the city has. So one of the things that my division sort of prescribes to is it's about getting towards an aspirational zero waste. So trying to develop policies and plans where we try not to create the waste to begin with, and specifically focusing on single-use plastics. So we've had a pretty lengthy history with single-use and takeaway items. And of course, like our, policy direction that we're given is really primarily driven by residents, the community. So they have their elected officials that they vote in to council. These councils can bring forward members' motions. They can then direct staff to look at a particular issue that's been identified by their constituents, by their community, and ask staff to put together a strategy that reflects the interests of Toronto residents. So this was all born as a result of Toronto City Council decision, a members' motion, to look at policies externally on how we can help residents, businesses, try to reduce single-use plastics, but also looking at the City of Toronto as a corporation. So what can we do in our operations to reduce single-use plastics as well? So part of that community science and that knowledge base policy program development is lengthy public consultation. So we have done 3 rounds of consultation, and in the middle, as everyone is aware, there was a pandemic that kind of threw things added a bit of additional timelines to our strategy, but that's okay, because I think it was important to reflect on how the economics of our local economy sort of changed. And I'll kind of speak to why that became an issue, or not so much an issue, but why it's something we had to take that into consideration in developing our policies. So as I mentioned, we did extensive consultations, 3 phases. 2018 was just tell us what you want us to target. Members of the community, what do you see on the streets? What do you feel like you generate on a daily basis? What are some things that you wish you could reduce? We try to kind of frame it in the sense of we're targeting single-use plastics and takeaway items. And we also want to get feedback on what would motivate you, incentivize or decentivize you to generate that waste. So very broad, all options open, available that folks can vote on. So that was phase 1. Phase 2 was taking that and refining it. So again, hearing from them, what items do I want to target? What sort of approaches would they want to see? Is it fees being applied, or is it by outright banning, or ask for us by request requirements? But also exemptions and accommodations. I'll come back to that and why that's really important in developing policies where you're trying to build a community-based approach to program development. Phase 3, that happened after the COVID pandemic. So again, after, of course, a lot of governments, a lot of organizations felt the fiscal hit, the financial impact of that, Toronto businesses as well. So we want to make sure that we were not creating unintended consequences of putting any individual or a commercial business or retailer in the City of Toronto at any economic disadvantage as a result of any policy that we bring forward. So we want to go back out to consultation to make sure that we're reflective and mindful of financial considerations. So why reduction strategy? And I think this speaks to the data that's out there that's collected by my colleagues here on the panel. Sorry, just going back to that, the second question in the poll. If you're in the City of Toronto, if you're looking for the science, the community-based science, we have it in open data. So our litter audits, our waste audits, waste generation, that's available. You can check other government websites. They may have open data. So that's one source where you can go to. But we wanted to make this a policy that spoke to folks, as in you need to kind of multiply this by the number of residents in the city of Toronto, then multiply that by the number of individuals living in the world and make it a really big global issue. So we want to quantify the impact. So we looked at sources of data that was available to us. We did rely on the shoreline cleanup with the counted pieces of plastics. The Dirty Dozen. We also utilize that list as well for the City of Toronto. We also do audits. So we do curbside audits, and if we were to then extrapolate that based on the average weight of a takeout plastic utensil, and then you multiply that by the number of households in the City of Toronto, then it kind of you get to something as high as 85 million units for foam takeaway container cups. That's a lot. So we try to quantify as much as we can to sort of get that message across that this is an important issue. And even though they seem like very small items, light items, micro and macro plastics, when you put it all together, it has a great impact. So framing the discussion. So in every single one of our consultation phases, we want to make sure that we're talking the same sort of language, nomenclature, terminology. What's single use? I'm sure there's a lot of court challenges on the definition of single use. So we wanted to make sure folks, kind of keep it simple. We defined it as something as a product that was designed for single use, and durability and reuse was not taken into consideration in the product design. We also wanted to make sure that we were material agnostic. So it's not about material substitution. It's not about finding another packaging or another item that can replace that. It's about reuse or not generating it to begin with. Because I think there's a sort of replacement of plastic items with compostables or biodegradables. So we want to make sure that it's above anything else, it's aspirational zero waste, to not create that to begin with. So material agnostic. Equity. So this has been a very important part of our consultation. So any might be science-backed, it might be community supported, but we want to make sure that whatever policy or bylaws are put in place are mindful of vulnerable residents, of equity-seeking groups. So we did quite a bit of consultation with them, making sure that even our consultation activities were accessible. So we did consult with organizations, not-for-profit organizations. Toronto also has an accessibility committee, and we want to ensure that we were able to, again, take this into consideration as we develop our policy. Because again, we do not want unintended consequences with the science and the data and the community-driven knowledge to develop a policy or program. So just to kind of summarize all up in terms of what we heard, extensive consultation only begins with comprehensive communication. So again, accessibility, equity in mind. Want to make sure that, again, Toronto has a very diverse population. There's about over 100 dialects spoken in the city of Toronto. So making sure that all materials were translatable. You can also have interpreters. We had at some of our events. We want to make sure there's different media forms being used. Everything was AODA compliant. So again, it's about making sure that it was very inclusive in that community knowledge, or building that community knowledge and leveraging their input and their feedback. And also working very heavily with associations and organizations in the city of Toronto and beyond that focuses on all the different areas. And again, if there was a group that felt like they were missed, they were, of course, we want to be inclusive. Great, send us some feedback. Let's have some one-on-ones. And, we want to hear from you and make sure that we're taking your feedback into consideration. So consultation activities. So again, I think pretty, for the most part, pretty standard in terms of in-person, live, online, public opinion polls. We want to make sure that we're not just capturing the opinions or feedback of individuals that are the passionate. They're already converted. They're already the ones that they know they want to do something to reduce plastics. We want to make sure that we're gathering input from the, I would say the public, right? So kind of statistically significant, a representative of a diverse Toronto population. So we did pair every consultation with public opinion polling. And the results were actually quite in line, quite similar. And then, of course, teleweb town halls. And as I mentioned already, we did, of course, want to make inclusivity, equity-seeking groups a part of the consultation, so working very closely with our accessibility advisory committee as well. So I think I did add this up. It worked out to be about 56,000 or so, give or take, surveys completed. We had quite a few in-person events, as well as just at every single time, as I mentioned, we did public opinion polling, so 1,000 at each phase, and quite a bit of written submissions at each one of the phases. So again, this is part of the engagement of the community, leveraging their experience, leveraging the data and the information that they have. So we actually did have quite a bit of feedback from organizations that also had their own data sets. We included them as a part of our decision-making process. And ultimately, just some general findings. So we found that surprisingly, there was a very strong support for mandatory measures. People felt that there should be bylaws, bans, fees, with, I guess, consequences for not complying. So that's positive, I guess. Top 3 reasons, and I think this is an important part of developing our policies and programs, is sometimes they feel like it's not really within their control, right? Like it's kind of like they even have the opportunity to say, to refuse the product. So top 3 was essentially they were provided without asking. So again, that's not something you would necessarily get from like the data per se. It would be something that you would only get through qualitative engagement with members of the community. But also, things like behavioral change, like unexpected purchases. And then in terms of, I think pre-acceptance, reusable items. So again, some places just flat out, do not accept reusable container containers. They don't accept reusable cups. So they felt that they were, again, limited in their ability to want to reduce something because they just they were not given the opportunity to do so. So next steps for us in the City of Toronto. So we have initiated a monitoring plan to further gather data on the impact of the policy or the bylaw that we've implemented. And we do this by the way of waste audit data. So I think I saw some photos from some of my panel members here. We just take residential garbage and public litter, public space recycling and litter bins. We dump it all out. We categorize them into over 200 different categories and we weigh each one. And that's what we're going to be doing pretty much on an annual basis from all our customer groups. And hopefully just see what the impact has been. So again, all that data, check out your local government's open data portal. Generally it's posted up there. And from there, hoping to strengthen our policies or bylaws and further, again, work with not-for-profits, other organizations, other orders of government to collectively have access to this data to help inform policy and decision-making. And with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Charlotte. Very, very interesting. Okay, so the last panel presentation is from Dr. Jennifer Provencher, who's a research scientist with the Wildlife and Landscape Sciences Directorate at Environment and Climate Change Canada. Okay.
This is it?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry.
There you go. Thanks, Nancy.
Hi, everyone. So privileged to be here today and so lovely to learn from everyone. I'm going to take us on a little bit of a different track. I am a federal scientist, and so I come from a directorate who has a long history in supporting domestic and international policy on pollution. So Stockholm Convention, is DDT going up or is it going down, right? We have to feed into these kind of big scale processes to know if we put policy A in line, did it do anything? And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm one of many of those research scientists who has to collect the data and really feed back into this policy loop to make sure that whatever we did actually is doing the thing that we want it to do. And so I run a plastic pollution program with many partners, just recognizing them here. This is kind of what the landscape of our program in my group looks like. We do water, we do sediment as the habitat for migratory species at risk. We do fish, we do birds. We work with universities, we work with academic partners, we work with First Nations, we work with Inuit partners, we work with NGOs. And we work with a lot of groups in very remote places to try to fill some of those data gaps. So it's really amazing to see lots of citizen science programs, and especially in our southern urban areas, right? We've got lots of bodies on the ground to do lots of work. But part of my job is kind of pushing outwards and making sure that we have a domestic look, this pan-Canadian look at what our plastic pollution looks like. And for those of you who are not in the plastic pollution world, plastic is not plastic, right? We've got morphologies, we've got sizes, we've got colors, we've got additives, we've got polymer types. And for those of you who are in the plastic world, or even in the treaty negotiations, one of the things that's really interesting is coming out of the UN plastics treaty negotiation is they're likely to list by polymer type, right? And so as this landscape is constantly changing, the data in which we need to feed back into these policies is changing. So we're riding this roller coaster together on what needs to be collected on the ground, what policy is listing, and how we kind of feed back those loops. And so with all that in mind, we have been doing community-based microplastic sampling in a couple of different ways. And I'll highlight that this means a lot of different things to different people. And so sometimes this means planning meetings in communities, which you can see in the top. Sometimes it means meetings with international partners. So again, when we look at how we align with others, we share lots of common ecosystems and spaces. We have, both domestic and international discussions. We do a lot of training in communities. So this is in the middle at the top is one of the workshops that we do in Iqaluit with the Environmental Technology Program. So again, going to communities, thinking about what they need, what it means to them. And then in the reverse, actually bringing partners into our own facilities in the South and doing research. And for those of you who know that my director general is actually one of those masked individuals in the bottom where he's learning from some of our Inuit partners how to swab for avian influenza and look for plastic pollution. So again, it's this two-way learning street where we're going north, they're coming south, and we're trying to really figure it out together. And then again, I would say that we do field work with partners, right? And I often talk about this as group work, right? We're doing this together, and then field work by partners. And so either homework that they've taken on or homework that we've taken on. And that dynamic changes. And so community-based citizen science, plastics, microplastic solution is not one thing. It is many things to many people. And that's one of the things that our program is really focusing on is that adaptability and talking to partners about how they want to do the work with us and then trying to co-develop that solution. So on a kind of expand that out a little bit, one of the things that Canada's really led on at the Arctic level is microplastics and litter. And this was a desktop study by I'm going to get the acronym wrong, PAIM, which is one of the working groups under the Arctic Council. It's the Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment. And they did a desktop study on marine litter a few years ago. And one of the things that was really exciting at the time was that some of the, macroplastics litter is really easy. You can do it with citizen science programs. The data goes back decades in some cases. There's thousands of data points across the Arctic. And we can do things like litter audits. We can figure out what country it's from, what region it's from. Sometimes we can actually figure out how old the litter is. You can do all kinds of great things. One of the things that we were then tasked to do at a pan-Arctic level under, again, the Arctic Council Litter Group that Canada co-chairs, and I'm the co-chair for Canada, is really say, okay, what are the spatial trends? What are the temporal trends? Does some litter show up in the Arctic more in some regions and not the other? And so we were tasked by the Arctic Council, so that's the 8 Arctic countries and the permanent participants, the indigenous peoples of the Arctic, to say, okay, go and do an assessment, right? Our homework was to do an assessment, spatial and temporal. So we undertook this a few years ago where we went and looked and say, okay, where are all those wonderful data points? And we looked at monitoring programs, we looked at regional programs, and what we actually found is that it's a real patchwork. So some are regional programs, like NOAA has an excellent program in Alaska. OSPAR, which is a slightly different one in Europe, has an excellent program. We see lots of tourist vessels doing some data point collection. We see citizen science apps. We see some shoreline counts. All of these are individual data points, but it's not the same. And so some programs remove the litter, some programs don't remove the litter, and that's purposeful. In some places, you are not allowed to remove the litter because there is a concern about disturbing archaeological sites. And so again, understanding this local context with what this actually means when someone like myself is tasked to say, okay, what does this look like at a domestic level, a pan-Arctic level, or an international level? The next part said, okay, well, we have to go and get the data to see if we can make these like beautiful pan-Arctic maps, right? And one of the things that we found is that, unfortunately, the litter data is in a lot of different places. And so on the Pacific side, there's lots in the NOAA database. On the European side, there's lots in the OSPAR database. There's some in OceanWise, there's some in the Ocean Conservancy, there's some in published papers that presumably are sitting on a university hard drive somewhere that's not accessible to anyone. And we found that really there is no single way to bring together. There's no portal, and it's really difficult to even think about how these mesh together. We also found that different databases are kind of growing up all the time. And so as litter has become more popular as a citizen science activity and more visual because of all the amazing public education efforts, more groups are doing these cleanups. More people are actually contributing to those counts. And so we see these shifting baselines. There's more databases that you then don't know where they are, and the effort is changing. And so we don't know if you find more single-use items like bags, is it because there's more bags in the environment? Or is it because there's more people looking on more shorelines and they're finding more bags, right? So we're seeing a disconnect between what those data points mean and how we can look at them together. Essentially, all of this means is that while litter, especially in the Arctic, which is what this analysis was about, is one of the longest, thickest, richest data sets, we actually cannot do any pan-Arctic assessments at all, spatial or temporal to date. And so one of the things that we've been working with partners over the last couple of years is really kind of closing this gap. How do we continue to do community-based, community co-developed initiatives on litter and microplastics? And I love the quote, right? Community-fueled science based in standardized, harmonized methods that actually means the data goes somewhere, right? Because citizens don't want to collect science that goes into the drawer, right? They want to collect science that goes somewhere and has meaning. And right now that is not always the case. And so this is one of the works that we've been doing with communities and with partners, where we've been working with actually tourism boats and different communities. And we've tried to, this is just an example of where we've done some of the work in the last couple of years with partners in the north. And this has been really interesting because we've been able to go to areas, because there's some areas where you get lots of data, right? We've got years of beach data cleanup in Iqaluit, but there's a whole lot of areas that you can't ever get to. And that was what communities were concerned about, right? They know what's on their beaches, but they don't necessarily know all the area, and they want to know what it looks like in relation to other areas. And so this is some of the fieldwork that we've been doing with partners. And these are boat-based litter surveys on shorelines, again, selected with community members and actually done with community members. And really, the goal at the end of this, and this is not a pan-Arctic map of real data, I wish it, this is my aspirational data, is that, you know, at the end of this effort that we're doing and we're trying to do with communities, and these are actually the environmental technology students in Iqaluit, where we have a site where we do annual collections every year. And the idea is that we have been doing, you know, the idea is that we'll be able to work together and have these standardized data sets that we can kind of bring together from all kinds of community citizens areas. And so one of the things I just want to kind of land on is that while we've been spending a lot of time and kind of in big letters at the bottom, we've been doing a lot of data observations and collections. The reason why we don't have a pan-Arctic map, or frankly, a pan-Canadian map, is because this handling, management, data side analysis is actually it's not as fun, right? No one gets up, well, some people, but not a lot of citizen scientists get up in the morning and be like, yes, data management. I'm gonna do more of that today, right? And so one of the cases I make is that, while we want to continue to do data observations, collections, public engagement, actually getting people out and doing some of that, we need to recognize that just as much to make that data as valuable as possible and inform policy to the best of our ability, we needed to invest more in that data management, data handling, and analysis side. Because really, again, we have this effort changing because we've done such a good job at public education, and that actually influences the data. And I'll just end on, anyone a birder in the community? Anyone? Yeah, a few hands. Don't be shy. Put your hands up, right? eBird started about 20 years ago. And eBird started as a checklist, right? How many birds did you see? And it became very quickly recognized that, well, people were just going out and checking out birds. But did they spend 5 minutes or 2 hours looking for those 3 species? And essentially what happened is that early eBird data from a big perspective, a science perspective, wasn't super useful. And eBird changed its methodology to actually include effort. And now, 15 years into having that bird data and the effort data, there are amazing data sets. And some of the data that's coming out of eBird, and my colleagues at Environment Canada and our American colleagues are doing groundbreaking, amazing work. But it started in this beautiful, amazing citizen science education program, and it fueled by citizens, but grounded in that data and where it's going. It evolved along the way to make sure that the data was actually useful. And I would pitch that we need to do the same thing with microplastics and litter in general. We need to think about how the citizens want to see it, how they want to do it, but make sure it's grounded in good data policy and good data management so that it's the most useful we can actually make something. Okay, I will leave it at there.
Thanks, Jen. Awesome. Okay, so that's those are 4 fantastic presentations. So how about this? We'll move into some discussion questions. I have some, but my invitation is if you guys have any, please don't hesitate to go up to the microphone and ask your question. I'll call upon you, and don't worry, don't be scared. But I'll get things started. How about that? I'll be the icebreaker. So we saw poll question number 2 and said, okay, what do we do to make people more aware of the data that's out there? And you can, I invite you to speak either about the issue of plastics or and litter, or more generally, so whether it be birding, whether it be plastics, et cetera. So how do we, as a community, make that information and that data more aware? So basically, how do we address poll question number 2? And I don't have nobody specific, so please feel free to speak up if you have views.
I'll make a start.
Yep.
I think around this question of different audiences and how we engage different audiences in this work, I think there's huge value in this kind of community engagement approach that is a kind of a broad tent and allows people from all different kind of backgrounds to participate. I can't remember. Charlotte, you were talking about having, there's the environmentalists in one side and the kind of things that they're interested in, and everyone else. And we see that as well in the different types of cleanups that we host, some of which are kind of corporate partners that are involved in the work and who are coming out with a team from an office environment. Those are not necessarily people with the same motivations as volunteers who have known Oceanwise for 20 years and have been doing cleanups in their local parks, even before we were doing it. And so when in doing that and in doing these kind of direct on the ground activities, we see this great kind of light bulb moment when individuals who weren't quite sure what they were doing that day came out to a shoreline that looks pretty clean when you start, and then realize, oh my goodness, in an hour, I've just collected 45 cigarette butts. Mm-hmm. I had no idea people smoked in Canada. That's kind of the sort of conversation that you have. And to kind of come back to your question, it is the hardest part to then say, we have to record this accurately. We have to know how long you were out here for. And we need you to categorize everything so that we can use it. And that is the hard challenge. And so I'm really pleased to hear so many people interested in solving that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. One of the anecdotes I heard is, you may not get everybody to agree that microplastics disrupt an endocrine, but most people don't want litter in their park. Or they don't, so, I mean, and I know that's a horrible oversimplification, but it is, when we talk about meeting people in the middle, I think there are places like that we can seek common ground. So thank you so much. I mean, genuinely, thank you. Can you introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hi, I'm Nicola Coper. I'm Dean of the Faculty of Environment for University of Northern BC. And so this question is actually for Dr. Provencher. I am an ornithologist. I'm one of the people who've done analyses with eBird data. Some of my favorite papers, actually. So I have two related questions. One is, could you simply start with the eBird app, because it's so well structured? It maps where you're walking, it maps how long you're out there, that kind of thing. And there's such a well-developed analysis process behind it. And then it just changed it for plastics. And my other question is, I've worked with folks from Environment Canada, biologists, who are working on taking data for birds from all that are collected in all sorts of different ways, essentially converting them to density estimates and then using all of those data in single analyses. And I wondered if you'd sort of taken that approach.
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to start with the eBird app version. So there are many apps. There are many apps for garbage collection. I won't name any of them, but yeah, and I think there are some groups. Like, I think this is the evolution of this, right? One of the interesting parts in our Pan-Arctic analysis is that we had to exclude all the citizen science apps because none of them have effort data. And so we have been in active conversations about, like, did you guys know your data was excluded because of these things? The challenge is that change is hard, right? Especially when something has become started as regional and it's addressing their regional questions and it, working just fine. Thank you very much. Or it's so big. And again, there's one app in particular that we couldn't download the data because it's so big and they can't even download it. It's so big. And so again, there's this, like, I know you're laughing, but it's true. It's a huge data management problem. And so, this is not a popular opinion, especially given my panel members, but like, education, citizen science programs are amazing, but we have to have more investment in actually using the data and being critical and bringing it together. There's a wonderful paper that actually did an analysis and said, okay, well, if I take this data from NOAA and this data from OSPAR and this data from Marine Tracker and this data, like, who speaks together? And the result is, like, you can make it happen, but it's a data specialist who has to knit those things together. And there's QA, QC, and all these things, right? And we're under pressure right now to provide this Pan-Arctic assessment. And our Danish colleagues, love them dearly, are looking at all of our data and thinking, Canada's not going to be able to give any of that data because it doesn't meet our standards. So again, it's this dialogue. But I guess my question to the eBird one is that you could, but that is a whole thing in and upon itself. And my biggest comment that, again, is not very popular is, like, we have to stop creating new things. We actually just need to use the things we have and be critical about how they're working or not working and try to push those out. Because I review a lot of applications, both kind of for academic and internal, and almost everyone wants to create a new thing because funding agencies like new things, right? They don't like, I'm going to refine this old thing to make it better. And so we're in the zone of tension where we have to, I think, really hammer home. It's not a lack of data. It's a lack of data, critical looking at the data and data management. So there's that side of it. What was your second question?
Just
Sorry.
that your colleagues at Environment Canada are working on using like bringing things like that together. I mean, I would precede that by saying all of the data sets that have been analyzed for the bird stuff have something to do with effort.
Yes.
They might be different measures of effort and they might be vastly different in terms of data collection, but there's a way to take effort into consideration.
Yeah.
So I'd say you might, not having that data is maybe devastating, as in you can't use it.
Yeah. So I would say that generally, as a federal research scientist, my job is to take data points from many places and bring it together and synthesize it, right? So I have data from my own program. I have data from partner programs. I've got, my job is to take all of that data, and I have a figure, I didn't include it, but there's citizen science program, there's monitoring programs, there's cruise ships, there's community counts, there's shoreline counts. And my job is to take all of that and crunch it all up and synthesize it and think about it together, right? That's my job, is that synthesizer in the middle. And then I need to inform domestic policy and international policy and when asked, municipal policy and all of these things, right? We've got all these outputs. And so I would say that we're working on it, right? And what's interesting is that we have European colleagues who are light years ahead of us. They've got the OSPAR program where they've been doing it in a repeatable way for several decades. And in the bird world, we actually, how many of you know that we have a plastics indicator on our Canadian Environmental Sustainability Index? It's actually the bird plastics. We have an indicator on the books for Canada. It's the birds. And so we do that and we align it all with with Europe. The challenge is, when we talk about beach litter, the data is just all over the place. And so I haven't been able to make the case on what is our indicator? So all that to say is that we're working on it, but it's a really hard space. In the birds, we've been able to get it on the CSPC index, the Canadian Environmental Sustainability Index, because we had a model in Europe. We had a few labs who adopted it. That program is run out of my program. We report it on a 5-year cycle. We report the same in the Pacific as we do in the Atlantic. It's beautiful. Data harmonization, yay. Right, we're nowhere near that. It took us 10 years to get there in the birds, and that was just one species, right? Now we're talking about a whole bunch of different things. So I'm open to ideas and I like lots of suggestions, but I think it's a work in progress. I suspect we'll be another 5 or 6 years out before we can make tracks on that. But it's going to take change by community organizations and the federal government both to make sure we're meeting in the middle, right?
Thank you. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, maybe I'll jump in a little bit about that. We had one about data accuracy. I think we went there, but what about the notion of credibility, repeatability? When you're advocating officials, be they policymakers, and this is maybe more for Charlie and Anne-Marie, how do you get across the notion that this is founded in science, that there is a rationale and there is a repeatability to it? What case do you make when you're presenting your findings? When you're advocating or trying to influence either municipal officials or federal officials, sort of on the veracity of your field collection? So it's a tough one. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I have spoken.
I can jump in, yeah.
Okay.
So how do I make a case, basically, when I present my
Yes.
data or my research?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I'll make bridges with what's been asked as questions. It's interesting because there's the entrepreneur hat that I have, as well as researcher, obviously, but I'm autonomous. I'm not associated with any university. So the NGO kind of is building its own research products. The case is simple. We bring the data. We kind of build a narrative. Let's say for Montreal, we gathered enough data to see variability in time. So let's say we're in a park versus the tip of the island. There's going to be a variability of trash. Let's say we pass laws like plastic ban for fast food restaurants that has been passed 2 years ago. We see a difference in the field. So it's very easy to take one place like Montreal as a lab and bring it to other municipalities. We do work with the federal government also. So through what I was saying in my introduction and through also how do you reach the public so they can access data, I think it's all about telling a story that is appealing, that reaches people's hearts, and that just speaks volume for people reaching their emotion. And so a good tool to do that is visual imagery, the data, obviously, but then having good speakers also to pitch what's important in a very short amount of time so you catch people's attention. We live in a society that moves so fast and we see so much content, and it's like if it's not attracting, we just skip, we swipe. That's how we need to tell the story. Mm-hmm. We need to be placed in a kind of a mindset of catching attention really quickly and fast and pass that message very fast.
Yep.
And we have the data to back what we're saying. And these mini stories like Montreal example, where we find now as many straws as before, but they're cardboard, not plastic. We find as many forks as before, but they're not plastic, they're wood. And so we see the consumer behavior not changing, but the impact on the environment is for sure better than plastic pollution. And so we can just bring this message to other cities like Quebec. We can move upstream and bring this message and just carry this message along. The other thing about like having tools to reach the public, reach the government, for me, it's a matter of building great campaigns, great communication campaigns with the media, engage the public, obviously, but engage in dialogues with the press, with the television, with journalists that are very precisely or niche into science themes. This is very helpful to catch the attention. And then just build projects or apps that are innovating, obviously, so the story gets always more exciting. But it's always a matter, obviously, of funding and how we can leverage what we have into making it bigger, wower, if I can say this expression. And so we can reach our goals as we move along. But that's definitely a field reality that is a daily thing that we need to face.
Excellent. Thank you. Charlie, anything to add in?
Yeah, thank you. I would say on the data side, it's a pretty similar answer actually. And I said at the start, I was pleased to come here to be able to connect because we have so much overlap in what we do. We have had conversations in the past. We're not really collaborating, and so I hope after this that we will be. Just on the veracity piece and the reliability of data, the purpose of having sort of particular locations. So I talked about 3 municipalities. We've got data across Canada, which Jennifer's probably thinking, oh my goodness, like we don't need all of this, so much data, is it even reliable? And so we have zeroed in places where we are trying to improve the quality of that data by ocean-wise led events. So we can kind of put some controls around the data collection and ensure that reliability. But the piece, and this is somewhat different to your question, but I just want to make this point and kind of maybe throw this out there as well, is to say we've spoken a lot about data and obviously the uses of it and then some of the challenges around it. But I think everyone in the room knows to a more or less scientific degree that this is a problem, and kind of we could name the 10 items that we see the most often, and we could probably name another 5 of those that have a pretty good alternative ready to go. So alongside this data, we're really trying to show the practical alternatives and the solutions that are not future thinking innovations, but things that are ready to go now. And I always just talk about coffee cups. And from the scan I did of the room, I couldn't see a single-use coffee cup. So I think we should all give ourselves a pat on the back. It's not unique. It's quite unique in terms of events actually to have that scenario. But how long have we been able to reusable coffee cups? It's not a new thing. It's 2024. We see the data that's been around for however long. I think this is something we can do. It's a change that's ready to go, and it's just practical advice. It's a logistics thing. It's a nudge thing. It's remembering to keep your coffee cup in your car or take it to work. Little nudges like that can actually just turn this from data into a solution, and we can knock that off our dirty dozen list and go after something more difficult.
That's excellent responses. Maybe I'll follow up with Charlotte on those points. I mean, you talked about solid waste audits, but then you also talked about the realities of a rate base. So it's a nice way of saying affordability. You know, like why should I care? And if it's weighed between this and, you know, an extra $50 a year in municipal taxes, like, do I want to fund that diversion project, or do I want? So how do you communicate? Like, yes, you spoke a lot about audits and waste audits. How do you communicate data and your findings in a way that's compelling and convincing? Because, you know, ultimately it likely does come at a cost. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, so I think Emery maybe said it best. It's about the narrative, right? So the data, what story does it tell? What we try to do is make it unique to Toronto, right? So putting in the context something visual. So we use, if you're familiar with, I call it Sky Dome, but the Rogers Center, you can, Toronto generates enough garbage on an annual basis that you can fill that entire stadium once a year. We used to have a landfill that was 7 stories deep and 7 stories high. We also generate waste on an annual basis that equates to about 70 70 the weight of 70 CN towers. It's taking something when people generate on a very individual basis and multiplying that, extrapolating that into a larger community number. So that's the first thing, is to provide some scale to the volume that's being generated. And then we pair that with, okay, great. So all this has to go somewhere. And part of that is, residual waste management. So there is a cost associated with it, especially in the province of Ontario. New landfills haven't been developed in over 10 years, and our own landfill is going to close in about 10 years. So, do we really want to put in a long-term capital investment into another landfill, possibly a technology, versus again, it's the little changes that you could be doing at home, like the behavioral changes, and, just based with the consultation data and input that we received, where it's kind of things like, oh, well, number one, I don't know that we generated that much waste. Number two, I was never really given the opportunity to refuse or to have a say in how I consume a certain product. So it's kind of putting that all together and saying, there is actionability for yourself as an individual to make that choice yourself. And, again, the cost associated with it, right? So again, the less you create, the less you have to manage. The less you have to manage, the less cost there is to the overall system. So
it's just compelling. Yeah, even if you take the purely economical view, the deferring a capital cost is always preferable, right? Whether it's buying a new car. So I think that is a practical way. So, okay, see, we're coming to the close. So maybe I'll do this. I'll ask each one of the panel members, if we're sitting here in 5 years having the same discussion about plastic litter, citizen science, where do you hope to be? What would you like to see? I'm going to purposely start with Jen, because you did talk very aspirationally around your data collection needs, but where do you hope that we be, and will the conversation be any further along?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the endpoint. I think we're going to be further along. I think that the plastic pollution path, I have been studying plastic pollution for almost 20 years now, and we have leaps and bounds, right? Like, we're getting better all the time. We're being pushed by each other, by others, right? So I absolutely think we'll be further along. I probably am a bit of an optimist, but I think it's unlike some of the other things that we work on. You're right. No one wants litter in their backyard. No one wants litter in their front yard. It's an easy win, right? No, litter's not really good for anyone. So I think we have that motivation and that push, both kind of amongst ourselves and in the global community. And frankly, the global community, right? Like, the UN treaty negotiations, I think starting, INC 5 is starting in 48 hours or something. In theory, there's going to be an international plastics treaty at the end of it. Maybe not. We'll see. But I think we're there. So, how far along, I think really just is dependent on how much more dialogue and sharing we can continue to have, right? Because it is an evolution. What we knew 20 years ago and 2 years ago and 2 days ago it's always changing. And so that is the beauty of this space. There are lots of excitement. There's lots of passion. We're learning together. But I do think we need to repeatedly come and have open, critical dialogue together and learn from each other. And that's how we move forward. And the beauty thing about that space is 99% of the people who work in the space are here for that. And so we just need to continue to be here for that.
Thank you, Jen.
So 5 years from now, I think I would say standardization, and also just I know, we have data sets, you guys have data sets, everyone has data sets, and just trying to align it all together. Because I think, Jennifer, you brought up in a presentation where presence of plastic bags on a shoreline, and it's well, is it because there's more people out there, or is it because, for some other reason? And I'm thinking, well, oh, hold on, I have data at the curb, right? I know what people are putting out there in the litter bins in the public space, as well as in their waste streams, right? So trying to find those connections, and again, to help put together a narrative, a story. What does this all mean from the person that's generating it, even going further up the value chain with the producers of these said products, and just sort of weaving it all together and saying, okay, great, where is it entering into our system? Where is it leaking out of our system? And where are some intervention points that we can easily identify to put in place other policies or some mechanisms to just make that little tailpipe thinner towards the end. Some optimistic, I guess, as well, but I think it's a great starting point just to find those gaps and try to close them.
Thank you, Charlotte.
It's a good question.
I went off script. I have to admit, this was
yeah,
not in the
no,
pre.
it was not.
I like the spontaneity.
For sure, harmonization is key. We're working in this phase of our project to basically train those professionals in the field so that plastic debris surveys become just a regular survey, like they would do inventory for flora, fauna, and then they could measure, they already do measure erosion, but then we should be measuring plastic pollution. And so for me, it's more a matter of getting the plastic pollution at a level where it's understood that it's part of the reality we're in now. It's a modern, actual environmental problem that we need to tackle. We need to keep measuring. And so it needs to be addressed as like a new discipline in the field of conservation. We're in this decade that we call the ocean decade. We're 4 years in, almost 5 now. And so the horizon of 2030 is critical for us because the waterways are going to be 30% more protected. And what we're finding is these remote places that we have access through boats, expeditions, we're seeing more plastic trash accumulating because communities are not there. And we didn't say it enough, but we did reach the public. People are aware of the problematic, and communities have a huge impact on the environment. Yes, litter, but they do the cleanups as just a regular activity with their families now. And so if communities don't have access to protected areas, marine protected areas, faunic reserves, islands that are so secluded and remote that nobody goes, and it's just accessible by endangered species, biodiversity, endemic flora, and field technicians, then it needs to be brought to the discussion that maybe we should be looking into these protected areas before protecting them with a law, with a frame, to say, well, maybe we need to implement this discipline about plastic pollution and not shutting our eyes on the problematic. And so for me, in 5 years, it's kind of a concerted movement where governments, municipalities, local communities, First Nations, everyone is involved in this discussion, in this solution. And we're not trying to polarize the problematic, because even for the international treaty, what we see is two opposite clans, where some say we need to ban, we need to stop plastic production at the source. And on the other side, you see Western countries saying, no, we need to put money into innovation to close the cycle on plastic, put some money into innovation to upcycle better. The answer is not this or that. It's in between. It's both. And so for me, in 5 years, I hope that this discussion is not polarized and that every actor is kind of involved into the solution.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Charlie, you get the last word.
Whoa, last word. Yeah, no, in 5 years' time, I think we'll be in the big room.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be in the big room. We're going to be in the big room because we're going to be 4 years after the signature of a global plastics treaty, and we will be riding the wave, unprecedented momentum for action on plastic pollution, fueled by increased concern about the human health impact. We haven't talked about health. Environmental issues are not top of the agenda for most people in this country and in most countries around the world. I know, that plastic is bad for human health. And I'm not a scientist, and I spoke to a government scientist this week that isn't sitting on this panel who told me that we can't draw a line between plastics and health. And I just think that may be the case now if you look with one eye closed. It will not be the case in a few years to come. And I think the combination of strong action at a global level and the research that will be forthcoming that will show the effect that these chemicals will have on human health are going to lead to a broadening of the coalition that's concerned about this issue, driven by proper binding targets on production globally, endorsed by international countries internationally, and that we've had, as a result of that, years of practical action, community science and data collection alongside, but driving real change in terms of alternatives, better systems for reuse and take-back schemes and things like that, and implementation, because we don't really have time to waste. We can't be having a conversation about data harmonization in 2029. It'll be too late. And the final thing I would say alongside all of this, and the reason that I'm convinced that this will happen, whether it's within that time frame, let's hope, or within 10 years, is because this is not a theoretical conversation. This is about the carrying capacity of the Earth. We know that we are full. And this will be rejected by laws of nature and physics. And it's just a matter of time. And so these changes will happen, and they're going to be transformative. And with the work that people in this room are doing, we have the opportunity to capitalize on that and really direct it and make sure that it's driven by the science and it's not presenting false solutions. So yeah, here's hoping that turns out to be the reality.
Okay, thank you. So I'll stop there. I want to take a minute and thank the panel members. It's been really enlightening. I really enjoyed this. Also, Nancy Lee from our organization helped put this on. So I really, really appreciate this. And I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as we did. So thank you.